It was the kind of night where the air felt thick, as if the world was holding its breath. Raheel stood in the middle of the dark street, the only sound his own heartbeat thumping in his ears. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to check it. Not yet. Not until he understood what was really happening. He had always been a skeptic. Life was simple, logical, predictable. Until now. Until this moment. The strange series of events that had led him here felt like something out of a movie. The quiet town where he grew up had always been peaceful, but something had changed. People were whispering, avoiding eye contact, and the normal hum of daily life had been replaced with an uneasy silence. It started a week ago, when Raheel received a strange letter with no return address, just a name, Sanaa. At first, he thought it was some kind of prank, but when he reached out to friends who knew her, they all looked at him with wide eyes, as if they were hiding something. No one wanted to talk about it. And now, Raheel found himself alone, standing outside an old, abandoned building, with only the dim glow of streetlights to guide him. Was it a coincidence that this was the last place Sanaa was seen before she disappeared? The question gnawed at him, but it was the sound of footsteps behind him that broke his thoughts. He spun around quickly, his heart racing. Nothing. The street was empty. He should have left. He should have ignored the strange message, avoided the path that was leading him further into the unknown. But something inside him urged him to keep going, to uncover the truth. The night air felt colder now, and the shadows seemed deeper, more menacing. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the entrance of the building. Raheel froze, unable to move, his eyes locked onto the figure. He couldn't make out the face, just a silhouette against the faint light. The figure raised their hand, as if signaling for him to come closer. But Raheel hesitated, uncertainty creeping in. Who was it? Was it Sanaa? Was it someone else who knew what was really going on? The figure stepped forward, and the faintest whisper reached Raheel's ears. It was a name he recognized all too well. It was his own. Raheel. Before he could respond, the figure vanished, leaving him in the eerie stillness. His phone buzzed again, this time more urgently. He checked it without thinking, and the message that appeared on the screen only deepened the mystery. Asterisk, they're watching you. Asterisk. Raheel's pulse quickened. His thoughts were a whirlwind, but there was no turning back now. The truth was just within reach, but at what cost? What was really happening, and why was he being pulled into the center of it all? The night was far from over, and Raheel knew that whatever came next would change everything. Raheel stood frozen, staring at his phone, the words flashing across the screen like a warning he couldn't ignore. They're watching you. His fingers trembled as he swiped the message away. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Who could have sent this? Who knew what he was doing here, standing alone in the middle of the street with his heart pounding in his chest? He had never believed in conspiracies or hidden secrets. His life was simple, just a few close friends, his job at the local bookstore, and a quiet routine that he enjoyed. But lately, it felt like the world around him had shifted into something unrecognizable. People he once trusted seemed to be avoiding him, giving him strange looks as if they knew something he didn't. The more he thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together, but they didn't make sense. The letter, the name Sanaa, and the whispers he'd overheard at the store last week. Everything felt connected, but he had no idea how. Sanaa. That name kept resurfacing, like a ghost from the past. She wasn't just some random person. She was a part of his life, someone he had known in high school. They had been close once, but after graduation, they lost touch. Raheel had heard rumors about her after she left town. Some said she had moved to another city, while others claimed she'd disappeared without a trace. He had never thought much of it, but now, it felt like Sanaa was at the heart of everything that was happening. Raheel glanced at the old building again, the one where the figure had appeared. His instincts told him to leave, to turn around and forget everything. But something in his gut told him that running now would only make things worse. The questions wouldn't go away. He needed answers, no matter the cost. He walked cautiously towards the building, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and a cold gust of wind rushed out, sending a shiver down his spine. The air smelled musty, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Inside, the walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floor was littered with broken glass and debris. It looked abandoned, but there was something about the place that felt alive, like it was waiting for him. Raheel's heart was pounding, but he moved forward. The dim light from his phone illuminated the narrow hallway, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every step he took. At the end of the hall was a door, slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. The room was empty, save for a single chair in the center. The air was thick, heavy, like it had been holding a secret for years. His eyes scanned the room, looking for anything that might explain what was going on, but there was nothing. Not a single clue. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer it, but something in his gut told him he needed to. He pressed the phone to his ear, waiting for the voice on the other end. A deep, distorted voice whispered, "Raheel, don't trust anyone." The call ended abruptly, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. He was not alone. Someone was out there, watching him, and the mystery was only deepening. What did it all mean? And more importantly, who was behind it all? Raheel couldn't shake the feeling that he was being dragged deeper into something far bigger than he could understand. The tension in the air was suffocating, and he knew that whatever happened next, he wasn't going to walk away from this the same way he came in. Raheel stood frozen in the dim light of the room, his hand still holding the phone to his ear, the echo of the strange voice still lingering in his mind. Don't trust anyone, the words spun in his head, each repetition deepening the knot in his stomach. Who could be behind this? Who could have been watching him all this time? He snapped the phone shut, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. The room, once just an abandoned space, now felt like a trap. Every creak of the building seemed amplified in the silence. He could almost hear someone's breath, but when he turned around, there was nothing, just the dust and decay of a forgotten place. Raheel stepped back toward the door, his mind racing. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Sanaa, too. The way her name kept coming up, like some kind of omen, made him feel like he was unraveling a thread that would lead him somewhere dark, somewhere he didn't want to go. But he couldn't stop. He had to know what happened to her, why everyone was acting so strange, and why he was being dragged into this. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, it's not over yet. Don't go home. Asterisk. Raheel's heart skipped a beat. The message felt like a direct command, like someone who knew exactly where he was and what he was thinking. He wanted to throw the phone against the wall, to end the madness, but he knew he couldn't. He had to find out what was going on, even if it meant stepping deeper into the unknown. He glanced around the room, trying to shake the feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But all he saw were remnants of the past, old furniture covered in dust, broken windows letting in the moonlight, and walls that seemed to whisper secrets from long ago. Raheel's mind drifted back to Sanaa. He remembered her as a bright, curious girl, someone who always had a question on her lips and a spark in her eyes. But after she left town, everything changed. Her disappearance was a mystery that no one spoke of. People didn't even ask about her anymore, and the few times Raheel tried to bring it up, the conversation would quickly turn cold. It was like she had never existed. The phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail. He pressed play, his hand shaking slightly. The voice on the other end was familiar, but distorted. It sounded like someone trying to hide their identity, but Raheel could still make out the words, "You're getting too close. Back off before it's too late. Trust no one, not even her." Raheel's blood ran cold. Was this about Sanaa? Was she involved in something bigger, something dangerous? He had to find her. He had to get to the bottom of this before it consumed him completely. But just as he turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind him. He spun around, but the room was still empty. His heart hammered in his chest. Someone had to be here. His mind raced through all the possibilities. Was it a trap? Was someone out to stop him from uncovering the truth? Or was there more to this than he could see? Raheel's eyes darted to the door, then back to the shadows. He wasn't alone in the building, he was sure of it now. But who? And why? Suddenly, his phone buzzed once more. He checked the screen with a mixture of dread and curiosity. The message was short, chilling. Asterisk, she's not who you think she is. Asterisk, Raheel's stomach twisted. Who was she? Was this about Sanaa? Or was it something, or someone, else entirely? As the tension built, Raheel knew he was at a crossroads. He couldn't walk away. But every step he took only seemed to lead him deeper into a web of lies and danger. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just a random mystery. This was something orchestrated, something planned. The air in the building grew thick, suffocating, and Raheel realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. Whoever was behind this, whatever game was being played, Raheel was a part of it now. The question was, how far would he go to uncover the truth, and how much of it could he survive? Raheel's hand shook as he read the text again. She's not who you think she is, the words kept replaying in his mind, each time more unsettling than the last. Who was Sanaa, really? Had he been wrong about everything? The girl he had known in high school, the one who had been kind, open, and full of life. Could she have been hiding something? He could feel the walls of the building closing in on him. The air was heavier now, thick with something that felt almost like a warning. The silence was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the broken windows, made his heart race faster. He had to get out. He had to find answers. But the deeper he went into the building, the more certain he became that someone, or something, was following him. He couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him, watching from the shadows. Raheel's phone buzzed again. The screen flickered to life, and the text message was short, but the fear it instilled was immediate. Asterisk, don't trust her, Raheel. She's part of it, asterisk, his pulse spiked, and he almost dropped the phone. Part of it. What did that mean? Was Sanaa involved in whatever this thing was? Was she the one pulling the strings? Raheel shoved the phone into his pocket and turned back toward the door. He couldn't stay here any longer. But just as his fingers touched the handle, he heard it, the faintest sound, barely a whisper, but enough to freeze him in place. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. He spun around, searching the shadows for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. No one. He was alone. Or was he? His mind raced with panic. Was it just his imagination, or had someone been in here all along, playing with him like a puppet on strings? His stomach churned as he remembered the voicemail, the distorted voice warning him to stop. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Raheel's instincts kicked in. He needed to move. Now. He bolted for the nearest exit, but as he reached the door, it slammed shut in front of him. The force knocked him back, and he hit the floor with a thud. His heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the person, or thing, blocking his escape. But the room was empty, just like before. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then they went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. Raheel's breath came in quick gasps. His senses were on high alert now. The darkness felt oppressive, as if it was pressing in on him from all sides. He could hear nothing but the pounding of his heart in his ears. It was in the silence, in the absence of light, that he felt it most, the overwhelming sense of being hunted. Suddenly, the sound of breathing. Not his own, someone else's. It was ragged, uneven, and it sent a chill crawling down his spine. He turned, but all he could see were the outlines of objects in the dark. And then, there was a movement. A shadow shifted in the corner of his vision. Raheel! A voice whispered, low and familiar. His blood ran cold. It was Sanaa's voice. But it wasn't the same. There was something off about it, like it had been twisted, distorted by fear or something darker. "Sanaa," he called out, his voice cracking, barely above a whisper. "Where are you?" The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It pressed in on him, filling the space like a thick fog. Raheel could feel the weight of the moment, the tension building with every passing second. Then he saw her, or at least he thought he did. A figure standing at the far end of the room, her silhouette faint against the shadows. His breath caught in his throat. "Sanaa," he whispered again, taking a cautious step forward. But the figure didn't move, didn't respond. Raheel's instincts screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. His body was frozen, as if some unseen force was holding him in place. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness. Raheel's heart hammered in his chest. He took a step back, but his foot hit something cold, metallic. He bent down quickly, his fingers brushing over what felt like a key that shouldn't have been there. It was old, rusted, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Was this a clue? Was it meant for him to find? His mind raced as he held the key in his hand. He needed to leave, to get out of this place, but a new question gnawed at him. What was it for? And more importantly, what door did it open? As he stood there, the sound of footsteps returned, closer this time. Not from one direction, but from all sides. The walls were closing in, the air growing impossibly thick. Raheel didn't have time to think. Whatever was coming, whatever was waiting for him, he couldn't face it unprepared. He had to find out the truth about Sanaa, and he had to do it now, before whatever was watching him took everything. Raheel gripped the key tightly in his hand, his mind racing as the footsteps grew louder. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat echoing in the silence. The shadows around him seemed to pulse with life, and the air was thick with something he couldn't name. Every inch of him screamed to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. He had to know what this key was for. There was no turning back now. The footsteps, slow and deliberate, were now unmistakably close. Raheel's breath caught in his throat. He turned, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the darkness. But there was nothing, just the same oppressive stillness that hung in the air. He was alone, or so he thought. Then came the voice again. This time, it was not the distorted whisper of Sanaa. It was deeper, colder, a voice that sent a chill straight through his bones. "You shouldn't have come back, Raheel." The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he spun around, searching for the source. The voice wasn't just a sound, it felt like it was inside his head, curling into his thoughts, twisting them. He staggered back, his mind reeling. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" A soft laugh echoed through the room, but it wasn't a comforting sound. It was hollow, sinister, and it came from everywhere, surrounding him. Raheel's mind flashed back to the first message he'd received. "They're watching you." It was clear now that this was no coincidence. Someone had been following him for days, manipulating his every move. The question was, why? Before he could process what was happening, the room seemed to shift. The walls, once solid and real, blurred and distorted. The floor beneath his feet felt unstable, as though the building itself was twisting around him. His vision blurred, and his pulse quickened. Was it the darkness playing tricks on him? Or was it something far worse? In the disorienting swirl of shadows, he heard the click of a door. A real door this time, opening with a soft creak. It was the door on the far side of the room, the one that had been closed off just moments before. Raheel's breath hitched in his throat. He didn't want to go toward it. Everything in him told him to leave, to run, to forget this place. But something else, something darker, pulled him forward. He moved cautiously toward the door, the key still clutched tightly in his hand. The silence was suffocating. With each step, he could feel the weight of the building pressing down on him. His senses were heightened, every small sound amplified, the scrape of his shoes against the floor, the soft whir of his breath. As he reached for the door, his fingers brushing the cold metal of the knob, the world around him seemed to pulse, as if the building itself was alive. And then, before he could turn the handle, the door flew open with a violent force, slamming against the wall. Raheel recoiled, his heart pounding in his chest. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a woman. She was tall, her face obscured by the shadows, but Raheel could feel the weight of her presence. The room seemed to dim in her presence, as if the very air held its breath. "Raheel," the voice spoke again, only this time it was clear. It was unmistakable. The voice of Sanaa. But this was not the Sanaa he remembered. This woman, standing in front of him, was not the same. Her eyes, once full of life and curiosity, were now cold and distant, empty. The person standing in front of him wasn't the girl he had known. She was something else. "Sanaa." Raheel's voice cracked. "What's happening? What's going on?" The woman, if it was truly her, stepped forward, her movements unnervingly slow, deliberate. Her lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. "You don't understand, Raheel. You never did." Her voice was calm, almost soothing, but it only made Raheel's skin crawl. "You're a part of this. All of this. Whether you like it or not." Raheel felt the room tilt. His mind raced, scrambling for some semblance of understanding, but it all felt like too much. What was she saying? How could he be a part of this? Sanaa, or whatever she was now, raised her hand, and with a flick of her fingers, the door behind her closed with an eerie silence. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. "This place," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, isn't just a building. It's a doorway. A place where worlds collide. Raheel's eyes widened, his throat tight. What did she mean by worlds collide? And what was this all leading to? Before he could speak, the lights flickered, and the shadows around them grew darker, more oppressive. It felt as if something was coming, something far bigger than either of them. The walls felt like they were closing in again, the space growing smaller, suffocating. Raheel took a step back, his mind struggling to catch up with the chaos unfolding before him. "What's happening, Sana? What do you want from me?" Her expression softened, just for a moment, before she took another step forward. Her eyes bore into his, dark and cold. "I don't want anything from you, Raheel. You were always just a pawn. But now, it's too late. The door has been opened." A loud, grinding noise filled the air, like metal scraping against metal, and the floor beneath Raheel's feet began to tremble. He staggered backward, panic flooding his veins. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. But what? What had he walked into? And more importantly, how would he survive whatever came next? Raheel's pulse raced as the floor beneath him continued to tremble. The air was thick with tension, heavy with an energy that he couldn't explain, as if the room itself was alive, waiting for something to happen. He backed away, every instinct screaming at him to run, but the door was blocked. There was nowhere to go. Sana, or whatever she had become, moved toward him slowly, her cold eyes never leaving his. "You still don't understand, do you?" Her voice was calm, almost patronizing. "This is bigger than you, Raheel. Bigger than all of us." He couldn't make sense of her words. "This is bigger than you," she had said. What did she mean? How was he a part of whatever was happening here? The building, the strange messages, the footsteps in the dark, it all felt like a dream, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "Sana, please," Raheel's voice cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to understand. Why are you doing this?" Sana's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a friendly one. "I'm not the one doing anything, Raheel. It's already been set in motion." She raised her hand and gestured to the room around them. "This place is a threshold, a boundary between worlds. And you're here because you opened it." Raheel felt a surge of panic. "I didn't open anything." His voice rose, desperation creeping into every word. "I came here to find you, to find out what happened to you." "Did you?" Sana said, her tone soft. "Or did you come here because you were always meant to?" The tremors in the room intensified, rattling the walls. Raheel's vision swam as the shadows grew deeper, stretching like tendrils, clawing at the corners of the room. The air became thick with a low, growling hum, as though something was about to break through. He could feel it, the presence of something immense, something ancient, pushing against the fabric of reality. "Sana, stop. What are you talking about?" Raheel shouted, his voice barely audible over the rising noise. For the briefest moment, a flicker of hesitation passed across her face. "You don't know, do you?" she whispered, almost to herself. "You never realized. But it was always you. You've always been the key." Raheel's mind reeled, the weight of her words sinking in. The key. To what? Before she could answer, a deafening roar filled the room. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything he could describe. The building shook violently, the floor beneath him cracking as if something was pushing its way through. The walls seemed to ripple, bending and twisting, as if the very foundation of reality was beginning to unravel. The shadows that had been creeping along the edges of the room suddenly exploded outward, coalescing into a massive, writhing shape. It was as though the darkness itself had taken form, becoming a living entity, dark and formless. Raheel stumbled back, fear surging through him. This was it, the thing that had been pulling the strings all along. He could feel its presence, its hunger, stretching out toward him like a hand reaching to drag him into the abyss. Sanaa's voice cut through the chaos, steady and calm. "It's coming. And it's only because of you." Raheel spun toward her, panic rising in his chest. "What do you mean? What is coming? What am I supposed to do?" But Sanaa was no longer standing before him. She was gone, her form absorbed by the shadows. Her presence, her words, they had been part of the illusion all along. A carefully orchestrated trick. And now the truth was clear. He was the one who had opened the door. The key she spoke of wasn't just any object. It was him. Raheel was the link between the worlds. He had always been. The shadow creature, its eyes gleaming with an inhuman hunger, surged toward him. He couldn't breathe. Every instinct told him to run, but the darkness surrounded him, cutting off his escape. The key was useless. He was the key. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. In a last, desperate attempt to fight back, Raheel shoved the key into the lock that he now understood was his own heart. His chest burned as the key twisted and turned, as though it was unlocking something deep inside of him. The air crackled with energy as the space around him began to distort. The creature roared again, a sound that sent a wave of cold fear through his body. And then, silence. The shadows collapsed, the room stabilizing. The pressure in the air vanished, and the oppressive hum faded away. Raheel's breath came in ragged gasps as he looked around. The building, once alive with dark energy, now felt still, empty. He looked down at his hand. The key had vanished. It was gone. Raheel felt dizzy, like he had just woken from a dream. But this was no dream. It was real. And the truth hit him harder than anything ever could. He had never been a mere bystander. The mystery, the messages, the terrifying force in the shadows, it had all been leading him here to this moment. He had been the one pulling the strings, unknowingly. The key was him all along. But there was something else, something far more unsettling, lurking at the edge of his mind. As the last of the shadows dissipated, a single thought pierced through his foggy, exhausted brain. Sanaa was never gone. As Raheel turned to leave the building, something in the distance caught his eye. A shadow. A figure. And in that moment, the truth became clear. Sanaa was still out there, and the door had never truly closed. The world was waiting. Raheel's heart pounded as he stepped toward the figure in the distance. His mind was still reeling from everything he had just experienced. The darkness, the shadow creature, the realization that he had been the key to unlocking this nightmare. The key, which had never been an object but a part of himself, had pulled him into a world where nothing was as it seemed. And now, standing at the edge of what had once felt like an ordinary town, he knew he could never go back. The figure moved closer, and as the streetlight flickered on, Raheel's breath caught in his throat. There, standing before him, was Sanaa. But she was not the girl he had once known. The air around her seemed to warp and shimmer, as if she were both here and not here at the same time. Her eyes, once warm and full of life, were now empty, hollow, as if they belonged to someone, or something else. "Sanaa," Raheel whispered, almost afraid to speak her name, afraid that the truth would shatter whatever fragile reality he had left. She smiled at him, but it wasn't a smile he recognized. It was the same smile she had worn that day they had parted ways after high school, but there was something different now. Darker, more knowing. "You found me," she said, her voice calm, detached. "But you were always meant to find me, Raheel. You just didn't know it. Raheel swallowed hard. What did you do? What happened to you? Sanaa tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. I didn't do anything, Raheel. I was chosen. Just like you were. This was never about me. It was about you. What you could do, what you could unlock. She took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. And now, the door is open. The worlds are converging. And you, Raheel, are the catalyst. Raheel took a step back, his mind racing. The worlds are converging, the phrase echoed in his mind. You mean this place, this world and something else? He couldn't bring himself to ask the bigger question. What happens now? Sanaa nodded, her gaze unwavering. The line between our world and theirs was always thin. But you, Raheel, you've torn it open. And now things are changing. Things you can't control. The shadows, the whispers, they were never just a warning. They were a consequence. She paused, her eyes narrowing. It's not over yet, you know. Raheel could feel his entire body tense up. What are you talking about? What happens next? Sanaa didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, almost as if she were contemplating something far beyond him. You've seen what they are. You've felt the darkness. But it's not them that you should be afraid of. Raheel's stomach churned as he looked around, half expecting to see the shadows swirling back, as if they were waiting for the next moment to strike. But the night air was eerily still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Raheel was left with nothing but the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Sanaa's voice broke the silence. The truth is, Raheel, you were never just a part of this. You are this. The worlds are colliding, but you, are the boundary. The thing that holds them apart. Or lets them through. Raheel's mind spun. He wasn't sure what she meant, but the realization hit him with a sickening force. I'm the key, he muttered to himself, more a question than an answer. Yes, Sanaa said softly, her eyes locking onto his. But that doesn't mean you're the one in control. And it doesn't mean you can stop it. The words hit him like a punch. He wasn't in control. He had never been. The darkness, the whispers, the creature, it was all part of something far larger than himself. And now, no matter how much he tried to deny it, he was a part of that larger force. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them felt suspended in time, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Finally, Raheel took a deep breath and stepped back. I don't know if I can stop it, Sanaa. I don't even know if I should. Sanaa looked at him with something almost resembling pity. You don't have a choice anymore. With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkened streets, leaving Raheel standing there, staring at the spot where she had been. He felt hollow, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to fall or turn back. The world, the one he had known, was slipping away from him, unraveling like the fabric of a dream. And just as he was about to take another step, a final message flashed on his phone, the screen glowing in the darkness. The door is open. But it is you who decides when it closes, Raheel's fingers trembled as he read the words. He wasn't sure what to make of it. But one thing was clear. The battle for control was just beginning. The door had been opened. And now, there was no telling what would come through next. The only thing he knew for certain was that nothing would ever be the same again.